We take a step back and we say, okay, this is what onboarding looks like. And it really, it's kind of stepping back a little bit from like that momentum that you're building to get the sale done, but really make sure that the customer's really bought into and understands what that journey looks like. So we call that a success plan.
Successful revenue leaders once started their careers just like you and I. They faced the challenges that their careers brought to them, they rose to the occasion, and became the leaders that we admire today. Join me as we explore the skills and stories that make a great leader with a pinch of vulnerability. Hello and welcome to Sales Therapy. I'm your host, Alper Yurder. Grab a chair. This is your exclusive invitation to the therapy room, as leaders are going to be sharing their career-defining moments, their secret tips and tricks in their arsenal towards success. And I promise we'll always end on a positive note. So today in the therapy chair, we have Jonathon Ilett, who is the Vice President of Global Sales at Cognizant. Jonathon joined the company in its early days, and his leadership has been instrumental in driving global new business revenue across key regions. We'll talk about his success, the joy, the pain, and the journey. Welcome to Sales Therapy, Jonathon. How are you feeling today?
Thank you, Alper. I appreciate you having me on. I have felt better. I've been a little bit under the weather this week. So this is my first external call since I've returned to work. But
wow.
Feeling a little bit rough and ready, but I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure the listeners will tell from my voice. That makes the two of us. As we start every therapy session, we generally start with your growing up experience, because I love how it shapes the person we are and how we show up to work, the things we do, why we do them. Do you mind starting us off with, like, where were you born? Where did you grow up? How was the growing up experience for you like?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an out and out Londoner to an extent. So I was born, you can probably tell from my accent, I was born in North London. So born just outside of Watford. And then done the kind of conventional standard route. I went to school, then went to sixth form, and then went to university in Swansea. I think that's really where I really got a real passion for business and sales. So I'd done international business management as my degree, and a core component of that was me studying abroad. So I lived in Canada for a year, and then traveled back and forth there quite frequently. So that kind of spun a real desire in me to kind of want to do something in the international space. I think that's really had that's really had a really big impact in when we've scaled internationally, like some of the experiences that I learned across the way. But now I just revert in Tottenham, and
I was going to ask, we're in London.
I do quite a bit for business across our different offices, but I've always kind of been based in London.
Okay, nice. I'm not big on. And in terms of that growing up experience in London, like when you compare the London of today to your growing up years, is it any different today?
I grew up in the outskirts of the city, so I've only really moved into the city like over the last 3 years. But I think business wise, over the last 5 years, I've seen a drastic shift, particularly in sales. I think when I first started Cognizant, we were one of the first companies that ever kind of set up that title of like an SDR. And even if you look online today and you type in like SDR, MDR, Cognizant kind of coined that in EMEA, because we were one of the first companies that had that US-centric view of sales development. So I think there's been much more, and you can see it as well, like the influx of AE roles, SDR roles. I think London's really, and the way I always kind of describe it is London's probably 3 or 4 years behind the States, and then you've got Germany and France, which sit another 3 or 4 years behind that. I think business-wise, it's definitely changed. As a place, I think it's as hectic as ever, and it's still, for me, still my favorite city in the world.
You mentioned Cognizant being one of those, defining or helping to define that role, especially in terms of sales development in Europe. When did you join the company? How many years ago?
So I joined nearly 7.5 years ago. I joined Cognizant.
Okay, so from the very early days.
Yes, and just for context, for anyone listening, like what we predominantly do is we provide B2B contact data for international teams that are looking to explore and sell predominantly outside the US. So the growth of Cognizant has kind of fueled as well, like the SDR, the role of the SDR, because we're kind of the company that's spearheading that. So it's been very exciting watching all the European companies partner with us to help grow their international business.
Okay, so I guess now when you say an SDR or like, the companies in your space, people are quite familiar with it, but I would imagine that in the beginning it wasn't like so. Like, can you tell us a little bit? Was it like a category in the making? Was there a lot of education involved in the early days? How was that? Like, walk us through that past 8 years or so.
Yeah, so I think so. I do a little bit of early stage investing as well, and I love telling the story because it's such an important pivotal point of when Cognism started. So when Cognism started, there was actually a competitor called Growbots.
Mm,
I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of them now. They're a Polish HQ company. They're about 3 million ARR, and then we also had Zoom Info in the States at the time with DiscoverOrg. So Cognism was formed. We were probably about the fifth or sixth player to enter the market at the time. We're probably about a year and a half or 2 years behind Growbots, and Growbots were doing the kind of European focus. That was really their strong focus at the time. What we done at Cognism was we just focused on execution. So we really built like the predictable revenue model, and we done that very very early. With an inferior product, I would say, to Zoom Info and Growbots. Sorry, my throat's going to go a little bit today. And what I did, that basically allowed us to really, really, really catch up with competition very, very quickly. So then, like a 3-year period, we went from being number 3 to being number 2. And if you look at the growth of Cognism, which we've been on, we've grown every single year. Up until last year, we grew about 100% year on year. We're currently sitting at around 80 million ARR. But when we started Cognism, it was very much like find your niche, like where we seeing success,
mm-hmm.
and fixate around that. So the way that we always like to describe it when I kind of talk about this thing is we done around 80% on a particular vertical, and that vertical when we started was recruitment. So we put all our resources on that. Then what we did was the other 20% is we tried all the different other potential ICPs that we could go after and personas. And then once we got a foothold in some of them, we then built out new sales teams to kind of tackle that. And that's kind of how we got to the point where we got to today.
It really helps especially in the early days, to have a certain niche and to kind of learn to sell fast as fast as possible to a certain ICP before you potentially, go after sort of everyone in the market.
Yeah, and segment as well, right? Like I think as we scale Cognism, I've really seen the difference between SMB, mid-market, enterprise. And I know that sounds pretty, that you would expect that, but I think when you really do put fixation on a particular segment, like all your product innovation, customer support, and workflow dependencies that you build in the product, like they all elevate, and it kind of has a spiral effect. You grow a lot quicker.
Something that I'm always fascinated about when obviously, like, I've been in this space for a bit, but Flolo, we only started 2 years ago, and we're figuring out our niche, who do we sell fastest, etc., trying to increase the average deal size. So I'm curious about that story for you. Like, okay, you came in, you started figuring out who buys this fastest, recruitment. And from there, how did you start building a bit of a, I guess, repeatable model? And how did you start expanding the deals inside those organizations where you were selling?
Yeah, so I think you have to be data led. Probably one of the best things that we done was we did make that investment in Salesforce very, very early. And obviously with that, we had the ability to then get really into the detail as to industry verticals, all the firmographic data that's driving what customers were coming on board, and I was able to draw some kind of trend analysis from it. So maybe one of the key steps we done on the journey was like we really took out of control. We took out of control of the reps their ability to determine what accounts to go after, and we moved that to management, and we were like that sits with management, and management, because we knew the data, right? We knew what industry verticals were succeeding, what company sizes we should be signing. And then once we made that transition, we knew that once we brought them customers on board, like they're going to have a certain net dollar retention, a certain gross dollar retention. And I think most organizations, you spend all this money on reps and data and all the tools that sit alongside it. But when you're doing your spearfishing outbound, you want to make sure you're going after absolutely the best fit accounts. Right,
and I'm curious, at what point, Jonathan, for you, the pattern started emerging quite clearly? I guess the first year or two or whatever was a bit like, there's bits and pieces and signals. But at what point it was like, you're not spending your time there because that's not where we're spending our time? What mark was that, and how exciting was figuring out this is where we sell really well?
Yeah, no, it's a great, and sometimes you need to take a punt, right? I'm sure we'll touch on that in a sec. And sometimes you need to go outside your norm
Yeah, of course.
to grow as an organization. But I think really when we got to around, I think it was around like 4 reps, that was really when we were like, okay, we know what
Hmm.
our spot is that we need to focus in on. And we've done the very conventional SMB mid market enterprise, like we've kind of gone upwards like that rather than just drop into a particular segment. But yeah, that journey of like moving up is very, very interesting, and making sure, I think, as you grow as an organization, making sure you bring in the right leadership at that particular phase as well. Like I think I'll be naive to say that I'll be the person I am today if I didn't have amazing leadership coming above me at certain points when we took certain funding rounds,
Mm.
and really help push the organization into that next stage.
Mm. Do
So
you
yeah, it's
have
been a good journey.
like, what were those one or two critical steps you think that leadership took to get you to where you guys are today?
Yeah, I think one of the key ones. So I was running the team at the time, and we brought in a brilliant leader from Zoom Info called Mark Bedard. So he'd been in the trenches there, helped scale out some of their operations. I think having like an outward view of the organization
Mm.
where they don't know the nuances of the business, but they can come in and say, okay, this is wrong, or this is how we've done it at Zoom Info, or this is industry standard. Like having that expertise come in was great. So at that point, we made a big push to go up market. And at the time, I was very hesitant because as you do, you get so caught up in the day to day.
Yeah.
And he really came in, was like, okay, we need to take this risk and we need to do it.
Mm.
And if we didn't do that, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. Other things that he helped done was like the account management function, putting a specific KPI on expansion dollars and renewal dollars away from the CSMs. So yeah, I think the biggest learning that I've seen over the time is like when I was in a position where I was doing very, very well in my role, like necessarily that person isn't the person to help grow that organization at that point.
Mhm.
And as leadership, like it's important to make sure those individuals that are high performing, they see that that's a opportunity for them to level up,
Mhm.
by bringing in all these external expertise.
And
And that's been great for us.
as part of that strategy, did you start pivoting maybe away from smaller ticket deals and to larger, or were there like conscious choice to potentially go after more complex deals, which bring a higher return, but also obviously they take longer to close, etc. Were there
Yeah.
moments where you had to make those decisions?
Yeah. So the way that we done it, and we've got a really good mentor, or our CEO has a really good mentor in someone called Pete Daffin. So he helps scale NetSuite. His big philosophy is like all about internal progression movements. So when we built our enterprise team, we took that from a high performing mid market segment, and then moved our top reps into it.
Mm.
And that was probably one of the best things that we've done. Like 2 individuals in our team, both of the records that we set for the biggest TCV deal and also the biggest ACV deal, both came from our internal movement reps that we put into that segment.
Mhm.
So I think if I was to do this again, I don't think it's necessarily just the product aspect of it that's right time to move, but also as well like the personnel that you put into that position, because
Mm.
it is a very, very different sales cycle. And I learned the hard way, like a top performing SMB rep is not necessarily going to be a top performing enterprise rep. They're very different motions and requirements. Like end reps need to be much more project management led, and a much more strategic consultant view, whereas an SMB rep is much more volume led. So it doesn't necessarily have an exact translation, but making sure that you've got that upward mobility in the organization, that for me, when I look back at our success, it's been one of the biggest drivers, across every avenue of the business, management roles, new regions that we've opened up. We've really kind of built that from the SDR base and allowed
Mm.
people the ability to then move around.
Mm. Gotcha. You mentioned some of those large complex deals and what kind of traits are different potentially from those high velocity
Yeah.
deals. I've always been drawn to those, for many reasons. I find them more intellectually interesting, and obviously paychecks are bigger
Yeah.
and all that. Could I ask you what's your preference? You don't have to answer because I know you take
Yeah.
care of a bit of everything.
Yeah, no, I think like the way that I view it is like your SME mid market needs to be that predictability engine. So
Mm,
like that needs to keep the taps on, and then your enterprise deals. As much as people say they're predictable, and you've got Medic as a
yeah.
philosophy that you can use to like help align to that, but like you are going to get fluctuations, particularly for us. Like we might sell into one particular region with a very heavy land and expand model, and that
Mm,
might take a set period of time, right? So getting the full whack of the entire contract up front is generally I see like very, very, very rare. So
mm,
you're right; it's a very, very different approach to how you tackle it. And we're in the process at the moment of migrating um, that initial holdover period once that first deal signs and retaining that with the original rep, which we haven't done in any other segment before. So I think
mm,
it requires a bit more of a, you need to view them very, very differently
yeah.
as to how you set up your SMB mid
More
market.
long term, and obviously like the investment, and you have to put the belief in a little bit more. You have to
Yeah,
be patient sometimes. Those are all very different and sometimes difficult dynamics.
for sure.
Um, because we have a lot of not just sales listeners, but like people from customer success and account management. I'm curious about that side of the business as well. Like, how did that evolve? How did you start seeing? I guess in the beginning it's new business, let's sell, 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 but eventually it's a SaaS model, so retention is important, expansion is important. How did that mentality shift start happening inside the organization over the years, and how did that power dynamic change?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been absolutely pivotal. I think it's probably, especially in today's market, like we're seeing it is harder to sign net new business, right? And those existing relations that you've got and where you've built that rapport and you've built that trust, it's much, much easier to retain and grow those accounts. And so it was really when we got to, so when we started Cognizant, our big USP was all on customer support.
Hmm.
That was one of the key differentiators of us as a business. So we very heavily like resourced on personnel when we first started, even for very, very small accounts. And we helped really to get success with the product very, very early. Um, as we scaled, we cut that back a little bit.
Mm.
Obviously, we adopted new technology to help assist it, so it didn't become more like so personnel led. But when we got to like the mid market, when we started like really honing mid market, we identified there was a lot of white space in the accounts we were signing. And yeah, instead of leaving that with a CSM who's very, I think, more reactive than proactive, I think that's probably the way to phrase it. They're very much looking to solve problems that arise rather than going out to expand the account and find
Mm.
new areas to sell. So that's when we built an account management function to sit alongside the customer success function. And the way that we break them up today is the CSM's done on like the retention of the account, the GDR and the NPS, and then our AM team's done on the NDR and yeah, the renewal rate of which they can do. So very different conversations. One's much more one's much more relationship led, one's much more financial contractual led.
Mm.
Since we've done that, we've seen, yeah, and break that down by segment as well. And we've seen when we've done the segmentation breakdown with less accounts per rep, we've seen really, really good success.
Mm.
But that was really when, yeah, when we started like really succeeding in the mid markets when we started doing that.
Mm. And I can imagine like that process must have been quite, it's not a very simple one, because the way people perceive their jobs, the descriptions, what role should each person have, therefore how should they be remunerated, how
Yeah,
should they be recognized. I've had my share as a leader trying to navigate the very complex um, the complexities and the difficulties of telling people like this is what you're going to get paid versus this is what the other person is having, and well, I'm actually doing all the job, why are they getting all of that? I've
yeah,
had my share of those things. Like, did you have your highs and lows throughout those changes in the years?
yeah. I think one of the big things when I look back was like the risk associated when we built out like our enterprise team and our account management team. Like we put we wanted to give it our best shot, so we did move like our some of our top reps and at the
Mm,
time to take over both functions. But I think you need to, the whole organization needs to be behind these people when you do that. And financial wise, like for year one and potentially year two, you need to pay very lucratively to get these people into those seats. You need to take a bit of
Yeah.
a risk on that.
Okay.
And yeah, when we done that, we put our best people. We gave a really nice comp plan that sat behind it. That's probably one of the key reasons I think why we done really, really well when we set that up as well.
And coming to today a little bit, let's talk about some of the current issues you tackle. What's top of mind for you. Maybe, yeah, let's start with that. Let me hear from you. Like, how is the year going? And especially, I'm interested in asking everybody, like, the money is getting tighter. Everyone's a bit more conscious about their buying decisions. Like, how is that changing your lives?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think that obviously the market is. I think you can kind of see this in reports from public companies, right? As well, like it's. I think Q3 last year we saw a bit of enthusiasm and excitement back, and then I think this year it's kind of gone back into a little bit of a lull again in terms of like buying particularly SaaS products. We're doing very, very well. Like we're still seeing success, and I think the reason behind that is we are data led, and we're looking at what industries and what segments are still buying and really doubling down. I think one of the key things we've done this year is be a lot more agile. So when we have our headcount plan at the beginning of the year, we have multiple regions that we service,
Mm-hmm.
and as we grow, like we are, if we have attrition for natural reasons or performance, like we're reviewing what region do we actually put that in now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's been one of the key things this year that we haven't done before. Before we would stick to a plan and just execute on a plan. So that's been really interesting. I think how we adapted. I think we've taken a real focus now on a real focus on SDR generated like pipeline and making sure that pipeline is actual pipeline rather than artificial pipeline, because companies have changed a lot in terms of their actually wanting to purchase software. So we've built out we've adjusted our comp plan for the SDR team to make sure that they're much more incentivized to bring quality into the pipeline. When we have bought software, we bought software that we feel will make the better buying experience. So a good software that we just purchased was Trumpet. That's been absolutely brilliant at stakeholder engagement and like making it a very good sales process for the buyer. And then what else have we done? I'm trying to think if there's anything else major that's come up. I think that like, to be succinct, they're kind of the key things that we're focused on at the moment is looking where we win, put resources in where we're winning,
Adjusting.
and then do that. Yeah.
What do you like about Trumpet, by the way?
I think Trumpet's just been absolutely superb for us. I think like I can give a really good example the other day of where it really unlocked a deal for us. So there was a particular deal that we weren't at power at, and we've got a really, really good champion that's really spearheading Cognism. It's approaching their end of year, so they're really locked up in trying to wrap up their deals. We haven't got through to the signer. So what we've done with Trumpet is we built a very, very good business case, put it all into this website, and then our champion's been able to forward that on to the exec team. And not only have we got the signer involved, we've got the CFO with visibility on it now. And the benefit there as well is that we're not reliant on our champion to sell the product for us in their interpretation of it. Like we've actually built the case and we've built the messaging, and that is actually getting pushed over directly to the C-suite, which we probably wouldn't have been able to do prior to their calendar year ending. So yes, it's been brilliant in that regard, and it's created consistency, and it created just a much better buyer journey.
And internally, like obviously as Cognism is a sales tool as well, like are you interested in that, looking into that digital sales room space, or like is that something that could potentially like why wouldn't Cognism or a Salesforce or somebody like that build it internally? Do you think there could be that sort of potential integration or?
Potentially, I think the one thing that's great about Trumpet is just the level of integrations that they've got. They've got a really good understanding of making sure that you've got really succinct workflows into your entire GTM stack. So they've got the ability to pull Gong in, they've got the ability to pull in CPQ quotes. So like it's created like a really nice flow. I think there'll be innovation in the space? Yeah, I think you can see from G2, it's one of the fastest growing segments. So I think naturally, I think more companies are going to start using it. I think it's going to become de facto. If you want to get that first mover advantage against some more legacy competitors, it's absolutely brilliant. It's such a good solution.
Yeah. So one of my questions to you was going to be like, how do you approach building and nurturing relationships in the B2B space? And I think like digital sales rooms, mutual action plans, etc. They kind of help that, especially when you have to coordinate different regions, different geographies. Like if you have multiple stakeholders in different areas of the business, it helps probably.
Absolutely. I think like one thing we've really focused on, and this is the benefit, I suppose, of having different regional offices, is we really push for like face-to-face engagement now across every segment.
Mm,
So we're running spiffs internally for the most face-to-faces that are taking place, and when we're doing these, we're seeing such a higher return on like
really.
close one rates. Yeah, so I think if you have got regional teams, like use that as an advantage in against head-to-head competitors that necessarily don't have that. And I think I was in one last week, and the level of insight that you get from a 2 hour face-to-face,
Yeah.
like people become a lot more open,
Yeah.
get a lot more information, and it really helps you understand their business and what their goals are.
Yeah.
And that was, I'd say, it's probably some of the main drivers to why we signed some of our biggest deals over the last year.
I love that. And in this final section of the pod, I generally ask leaders who've been through kind of similar experiences themselves, like the advice they would share with somebody who's going through that journey at the moment. So I have a few like 1 minute rapid fire questions I'm just going to shoot if you don't mind.
Sounds good, mate. Fire away.
Live. Okay. So, first one, I would say a lot of industries are very competitive, and so is yours.
Mhm.
What are the things that you can do to help stand out from the competition in general?
Yeah, so I love this. This comes from our US leader. This is core to her team's philosophy, which is win by how you sell.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think breeding that culture from day one of like customer first, yeah, buyer centric, is such a big differentiator when it comes up against some larger competitors that we sell against. So yeah, I think culturally build a really strong foundation. And I love the win by how we sell. It's such a strong message that everyone's harped onto the US team.
Mm. And I guess tools like digital sales rooms, Trumpet, Flowla, all this category that you enjoy, they are kind of the way you stand out in the way you sell.
I think that as well, but also like just response times and stuff like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
actually having pride in your work that you do. So like we have a zero inbox policy across the board in the account executive team, and part of that is like win by how you sell. Like we want to be quick, we want to be responsive, we don't want the buyer chasing us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think stuff like that makes such a difference in competitive head-to-heads.
Mm. And in sales, we always think about new business closing, etc. But then I think we already mentioned that times are different. Retention is very important. Existing relation. What do you think is an ideal sales to customer success relation? Like, where do you feel like you've observed frictions in the past, and how can
Well,
people
Alper, the line
avoid
cut
those
out a little bit
frictions?
then.
Like, what are some of the best practices you can do to have a well functioning revenue team?
Alper, do you mind repeating that? The signal went out quite
Yeah, of
badly.
course. So my question was around new business and closing and all that is good, but especially because of the times we're in, retention is very key. So I guess a good indicator of retention is the collaboration between sales and customer success. So my
Mhm.
question was like, where do you think frictions might arise in that relation, and how do you have a well-functioning revenue team? Like, what are the things you can implement to make sure that
Yep.
the buyer has a great experience?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's actually something that we've literally were discussing on our last leadership offsite. So I'll give you our actions in terms of what
Nice.
we're thinking of doing. So we're in the process at the moment of redoing our pipeline stages.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're looking to do is have a pipeline stage between, I believe it was between negotiation, just before negotiation and contract. And what that phase is called success plan. And that's where we take a step back and we say, okay, this is what onboarding looks like. This is a customer success team. This is your account management team. This is what the benchmarks are that we deem to be success when you go live. And it really, it's kind of stepping back a little bit from
Mm-hmm.
like that momentum that you're building to get the sale done, but really make sure that the customers really bought into and understands what that journey looks like. So we call that a success plan at that point, and we're doing this today, like ad hoc for our enterprise and mid-market account deals. Any deal over like a 50K deal size for us gets assigned a CSM and gets assigned an AM prior to the contract being signed, and they join the sales cycle. So we're just making sure that's in place for every segment now.
Yeah, I
And
love that. I love
it
that.
works.
That's very, very forward thinking. And actually, the funny thing is, we started Flow as a digital sales room, but now customer success and onboarding teams have taken it and hacked it into, and they use it a lot for success plans. That's actually one of the areas where we sell the product faster. I
Yeah,
think because people realize it's funny, like nobody wants to give you their time. They want everything to be async. They want you to be available, but like, how do you make all that happen? It's very complex. Some of these onboarding takes ages to implement, etc. So I think that's an area which is going to be even more ripe for disruption and new technologies, and I think that will be a make or break thing for long-term success of people.
I think in like a head-to-head as well, like that could be the deciding factor. If there's pretty similar functionality and price point, like having that conversation where you step back and discuss like what does success look like for you, this is what the
Exactly.
onboarding journey looks like, that could be the clincher that gets the deal done. So yeah, it's really, and I think we're talking on enterprise sales as well. I think that's one of the biggest differences is team selling as opposed to individual selling, and like
Absolutely.
bringing those people in makes such a difference.
Yeah, and having that very frictionless, because the buyer doesn't care if you're CS, sales, implementation, whatever. They just see one human being, and they want their problem to be solved. Basically, my last
Exactly.
question will be about. I guess now Cognizant is a global company. Was it started in the UK, or is it a European startup initially? Is that an accurate thing to say? It was a UK startup that became a global brand?
Yeah, no, very. I'm very proud. We're a British company, so
Okay.
we
Well,
got So our founder James, he's from Switzerland, but like the team when the company was formed, it was based in the UK, and
mm,
all our operations are based from the UK
okay, so
mainly.
this resonates a lot for me. As a UK-based startup in a US-dominated industry, I would say, which is what Flowler is in.
Yeah,
What are your learnings? What are your tips for me to kind of break into the US market? I mean, already 70% of our revenue is coming from the US. So, what
yeah,
are your tips? What are the things that you have happened to see in your time that you can share as advice?
yeah. I think very good that your revenue 70% is coming from the states already. That's I think for us, like, and I've kind of seen this with some of our competitors as well. Like they've gone into the states very, very prematurely, without kind of having the foundation set in place in the UK, and and the US is very, very expensive. Like
Mm,
I'm sure you could if you've got people on the ground and personnel and everything like that. Like it's probably about 1.5 the cost of what we're looking at in the UK. So it's a very, very quick burn if you're not getting success there very
mhm,
quickly. Um, I'd say from my perspective, looking back, I think, like I said, the UK is probably about 3 or 4 years behind. Very competitive in the States. Like there's almost 100% likely that you're going to have some kind of competition out there.
yeah.
Um, Whereas in the EMEA markets, like that's really where we've seen that kind of greenfield opportunity. 40, like very, very high win rates, upwards of like 40% when we enter a new territory. Um, and I think that everyone says the US is the holy grail, and I think it is the holy grail to get there at a certain point, and it will elevate your revenue very, very quickly. But I think really mastering your home territory and looking at other areas where there necessarily isn't that kind of competitive
Mhm.
environment, it's a really, really good opportunity when you first kick off. Um, so yeah, I think the way that we've done it is we kind of looked at little micro regions and kind of looking to scale that way, and then the US is obviously huge for us now. We got a big team out there, but that took around 4 or 5 years before we really put focus on the US.
And you had a very established competition as well, like the Zoom Infos of the world, and you know,
Exactly right. Like I think that's really when you go to the US is when your product really holds up.
yeah.
Whereas prior to going to the US, you can most likely in the European markets really deliver just on kind of like inferior products, better sales. But when you go to the States, you really need to have both humming to be able to succeed.
Well, as we've come to the end of our time, I will have to cut us on the clock as any good therapist. But I'm sure there are questions that I haven't asked you. So I'm wondering, Jonathan, is there any question that I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, I think we covered loads there, Alpha. And like, if anyone wants to connect with me as well, like I'm happy. Just add me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat to
Absolutely.
anyone. But Alpha, I really appreciate the time. It was a great
Yes, of
chat.
course, my pleasure. And this has been a great chat. I think it's been a very practical chat with a lot of. I always love to try to balance like the experience of the individual with something that can be practical and relatable to others, because a lot of our listeners are people who are kind of earlier in their careers, and they look up to others and try to get the, just give me the advice, just give me what I need to do very straight. And I think there's been a lot of that in this chat.
Takeaways are the best, right? For sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much again, Jonathan, for joining me on this therapy session at Sales Therapy. That's going to be a wrap on this episode of Sales Therapy. And if you enjoy the show, obviously follow us and subscribe to us on Spotify, and give Jonathan a follow as well. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. See you till the next time.